Hey everybody, Mauricio here, and today we're going to talk about the difference between a 506B and a 506C exemption. Now, this is pretty technical, and this is as technical as I'm going to get, so don't worry about moving forward. But prior video, we talked about the definition of a syndication, or the definition of a security, and we went over the fact that once you realize that you're in the business of issuing securities, meaning you're doing a syndication, that there was really three things we needed to worry about. If you guys remember, number one is we had to either register the security with the SEC, or number two, we had to find an exemption to registration, or number three, it was illegal, right? And so we didn't want to do a registration and we didn't want to do something illegal, and so we're always looking for an exemption. And 506B and 506C are simply two of the most popular exemptions that are out there. Now, there are others that you may have heard of, Reg A or regulated crowdfunding or things like that, but there's a reason why 506B and 506C are by far the most popular exemptions to registration. Primarily, number one, they're safe harbors. So we're going to go through B and C, and the idea is once you've hit these bullet points that we're going to go through, we're going to highlight sort of the important highlights of each one, then you're assured of compliance. There's no guesswork. We don't have to rely on anybody. We've basically assured that we've relied on an exemption to the registration. And number two, and in my opinion, probably more importantly, it preempts state law. And preemption is just a fancy way of saying we don't have to worry about the states other than the anti-fraud provisions. We still can't, we can't be Bernie Madoff, we can't commit fraud, we can't do all that stuff. But I don't have to go to each particular state and hire an attorney in California and Texas and Florida and make sure that we're complying with those statutes. I mean, if you can imagine, you're trying to put together a syndication and you've got to comply not only with the federal rules, which is what we're going to be talking about, but now you've got to make sure it fits within all these individual state statutes. So this is where 506B and 506C come into play, and this is why I think last time I saw the statistics, about 95% of syndicators or people who are doing these syndications rely on either a 506B or a 506C. So let's go through these real quick. One of the nice things about 506B, and the first thing I want to talk about, is you can raise an unlimited amount of money. So even the big boys, the JP Morgans, the Merrill Lynches, the Goldman Sachs of the world, they rely on 506B primarily. I think the last big one that I saw was from BlackRock, and they raised a $26 billion real estate fund, $26 billion, and they did it under 506B. Why? Because you can raise an unlimited amount of money. So that's number one. Number two, and this is probably one of the reasons it's pretty popular as well, is you can accept up to 35 non-accredited investors. As long as you're sophisticated, you can accept in a 506B deal. Again, so if you're starting out, this is your first syndication, and you've got family members, inevitably Uncle Bob or Aunt Karen, they're going to be non-accredited investors, and so it's nice to be able to accept those into your deal. Now, I'm not going to go into the definition of accredited investor because we're going to do that in a following video, but it's nice to have non-accredited investors in your deal. The main limitation of 506B, is that there's no advertising. No advertising or general solicitation. So you're not allowed to go on social media and post about your deal. You're not allowed to go to conferences and pass out your business plan. It's really meant to be a private offering. It's an offering between friends and family and people that you have pre-existing relationships with. Generally speaking, in order to show that you're not advertising, is you have to have what we call a pre-existing substantive relationship. And we've talked about that in one of the other videos, and it's one of the biggest mistakes I think these days a lot of syndicators are making. So we're going to talk about it in another video, but that's another big thing about 506B. The last thing that we will cover, not the last thing, but as we mentioned before, it's a safe harbor, so we don't have to worry about the states. And lastly, there is a requirement, and this is the only thing we really worry about in the states, is the blue sky. Probably should have done this as blue, but it's blue sky filing. So the one thing we do need to do with the states is every time you have an investor in a particular state, we do have to file what's called a Form D. A Form D gets filed with the SEC, and a copy of that Form D needs to go to all of the states where your investors are located within 15 days, 1/5 of that first sale. That's not technically a prerequisite of the exemption, but a lot of states just aren't happy if you don't file it. If you file it late, there's often a lot of penalties involved, the late fees, and there are a few states out there that get really upset and send you sort of nasty grams when you're late, and they threaten all kinds of legal action, and you end up just spending a lot of time and energy and legal fees when you fail to file Form D. So just get it done, have your attorney file the Form D, but that's going to be a prerequisite of 506B. Now, this was the only exception we had until about 2013, which is when 506C came into the world. And 506C is very, very similar to 506B. You can still raise an unlimited amount of money. So that's the same, no issues there. You can only accept accredited investors only. So accredited only. That's one of the big differences between a 506B and a 506C. Under 506C, you can only accept accredited investors, and you must take what's called reasonable steps to verify that they are in fact accredited. Over here, which I probably shouldn't have written down, is you can rely on their representations. Typically, if you're a syndicator, you're going to issue a questionnaire. As a passive investor, if you've invested passively before, you've seen these questionnaires, you've basically checked the box, you fill out, you represent to the sponsor that you're accredited, and the sponsor can rely on that representation. Over here on the 506C, no can do. You've got to take reasonable steps to verify, which generally means you're looking at tax returns, you're looking at W-2s, 1099s, bank statements, whatever it takes to show that this person is accredited. You can't just take their word for it. Number 3, which is the big one, is unlike 506B, you can advertise. So for the first time ever, back when it came out in 2013, you can go on social media. You can take out an ad in the Super Bowl if you want to. You can go an ad on the Goodyear blimp. You can do pretty much anything you want, scream from the top of the mountain that you have this particular offering, and it's going to be allowed under 506C. Again, the only limitation you're really going to have versus 506B is you're going to only be limited to accredited investors only, and you're going to have to take reasonable steps to verify. But other than that, you can advertise, which, as you can imagine, is a pretty enticing reason to use 506C. Now, I will admit that for whatever reason, between these two exemptions, 506B remains by far the most popular of the two. About 90 to 92% of the raises happen between these two, between 506B, and only about 7 or 8% rely on 506C. Why? We're not sure. I think one of the reasons that we are sort of thinking is that a lot of accredited investors just don't want to provide investors with their personal information, right? They'd rather just check the box and represent that they're accredited as opposed to having to provide them with their financial information. To be clear, though, there's several third-party verification companies that you use, and in fact, we recommend all our clients use them. They're very, very inexpensive, and for maybe $75 or $80 an investor, you can have a company go do all the dirty work and find out whether they're accredited or not and give you a letter making that representation. So it's just a cost, and I don't think it's a huge deal, but for whatever reason, a lot of investors still would rather have a 506B. Still a safe harbor over here. It's still a safe harbor, and we still need to file the blue sky filings. Oops, the blue sky filing over here. So as you can see, the main pivot points between 506B and 506C is, do you want to advertise? Because if you want to advertise, you're going to have to do 506C and only accept accredited investors. Or do you want to take non-accredited investors? Because if you want to take non-accredited, because you have friends and family that will go in there, you're going to have to go with a 506B. So that's usually the first 2 questions that we always ask at the beginning of a representation is, where are your investors going to come from? Because if they're going to come from advertising, we do 506B. And if they're going to come from people, friends and family that you already know, they're going to be 506B. So hopefully that was helpful for you guys, and really looking forward to the next video.